Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Game Boy Advance and its massive library full of hits and classics. Discontinued in 2008 and selling more than 80 million units, this amazing piece of hardware had over 800 games released in North America alone. It was also backwards compatible with the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color games, which made it a bit of a Swiss Army knife for portable gaming. Let's jump in and take a look at some of my favorite GBA favorites. Okay, I'll just briefly touch on the hardware since the GBA was pretty prolific, but I wanted to spend a few seconds talking about some of the different versions available for the hardware. First up is this launch model, which is super common, and while there were many different color options available, this indigo color seemed to be the most produced, but of course that's anecdotal. It features a 240 by 160 display screen that was not backlit and a 16.8 MHz 32-bit CPU, which powered the library well, but a major callout is that it takes physical AA batteries to run. Ergonomically, it's comfortable, and the L and R shoulder buttons specifically are well placed. A few years later, they created the SP revision, which has this flip top, a brighter screen, and most importantly, a rechargeable battery to get rid of those ridiculous AA's. Also notable is that with the redesign, the shoulder buttons got smaller, and with the screen up, it can be difficult and harder to use. Later on, though, one of the most sought-after models is the revision to the SP, which is this AGS 101 model. And the reason for this is that it features a backlit screen, and it really makes for the best and brightest experience on original hardware. Lastly, it's worth calling out that the Game Boy Micro launched in 2005, and it drops backwards compatibility with the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and since it came out a year after the DS launched, it went well under the radars. Okay, that's about all I wanted to cover for the hardware, so let's jump over to the games. First up is Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Castlevania really hit its Metroidvania stride with the Nintendo handheld consoles, with 3 amazing iterations on the GBA and 3 more on the DS were released in the same style as Symphony of the Night, and all of which are worthy additions to a favorites list, but I think Aria of Sorrow takes the prize for me. Breaking away from the Belmont family, you begin the game as Soma Cruz, who unknowingly gets pulled into a solar eclipse and finds himself on the front lawn of Dracula's castle. As Soma, you need to explore the castle, defeating enemies, and gaining special abilities like double jump, backdash, underwater breathing, and more, which, like most Metroidvanias, lets you unlock more areas to the game. You'll be equipping armor and weapons like swords, hammers, sword whips, and more to increase the combat statistics, which will definitely help you in your quest. But beyond equipment though, Soma gets an interesting power which lets him command the souls of monsters, which he'll need to collect typically through defeating enemies. Souls come in 3 categories and can be equipped or swapped out in the menu, but each provides you some power like slow floating, new special attacks, or a passive stat point increase. The layout and the map of the castle is fantastic, and it really gives the critically acclaimed castle from Symphony of the Night a run for its money. Throughout the exploration, you'll find the typical save and warp rooms scattered around the castle to help you traverse nicely, but it also has many story points where you'll meet other characters wandering the halls or progress the story arcs for these folks individually. One character that you'll meet early on and continually throughout the game is J, which stands for something that I'll keep hidden in case you want to discover the plot for yourself. Once you complete the game with Soma though, this mysterious character becomes a playable character from the start who has all the abilities unlocked but never levels up or gets any different weapons, and it just makes for a really great New Game Plus experience. The story overall is decent for the genre and contains some mystery, though I suspect it will be more of the amazing gameplay than the story, which will keep you coming back for more. The bosses are numerous and unique from one another, and they just present good challenges that really don't require any grinding of the levels, which keeps the pace nice and tight. As the third game in the Castlevania series on the GBA, and in the same Metroidvania style, this one is really the polished showing and thus just tops my favorite amongst the pack, but it's worth calling out that the others are still great and features superb art and music. You can't really go wrong with any Castlevania on the Game Boy Advance, but if you're looking for the best, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Okay, next up is Gunstar Super Heroes. Now, if you saw my recent video on the Genesis past and present games, I sadly had to cut out Gunstar's Heroes for time reasons, but that shouldn't deter anyone from recognizing how incredibly fun that game is. And 8 years later, we get a portable version of that game on the GBA called Gunstar Super Heroes, and it absolutely delivers to the expectations of the original. If you've not played either, these come from the beloved developer Treasure, who probably deserves their own video at some point. But to be concise, they've earned a loyal fan base in part of the job that they did with Gunstar Heroes. It's a run and gun platformer that has you progressing through levels and planets that puts you in a very center of all the action and explosions. And you'll have 3 unique weapons at your disposal to switch between on the fly, and from there, you're holding down that fire button until everything that you can see is toast. The levels are impressive for multiple reasons. The art is great and they're intuitive to progress through, which keeps the action cranked from start to finish. Even more impressive though is Treasure's creative use of scaling and rotation, which can be seen as a major mechanic in many stages. My favorite being this early stage where you're gunning down enemies on top of a speeding ship, where you get to rotate it until you're all filling up puke buckets. The stages and their bosses are just epic and feel with the explosions all over the place, flying through the air, hanging from everything. It's just over the top in a good way, and there's generally smooth performance to capstone this amazing gameplay. In between stages, you'll get some story and good-looking cutscenes, some of which actually feature voice acting, and that's actually rare for this system, but it's also of good quality.
Greetings, I am General Gray.
This handheld entry is more of the same of what we got on the Genesis, and that's in no way a complaint. This definitely is one of my favorite games on the GBA. Here's a title from a series that everyone's going to be familiar with. This is F-Zero Maximum Velocity. And North America actually got 2 F-Zero titles on the GBA, while Japan got more. But my favorite of the 2 available is Maximum Velocity, though I will say that they are pretty darn similar. They both have the same F-Zero Mode 7 style and art that we got on the Super Nintendo, and while that's not bad, I think they could have actually done better here. That said, there is no slowdown on the performance side, and the races retain the impressive speed the series is now known for. I said I preferred Maximum Velocity, and that's mainly to do with the harder difficulty presented over its counterpart called GP Legend, which just feels a little bit too easy for me. Here though, you're going to experience the other end of that spectrum, as the AI really presents a tough challenge after the first race of the circuit. If you think that you can get away with just pressing the gas, you're in for a rough time with this title. Beyond the Mode 7 general look and feel of the game, the race mechanics here too remain largely the same. You race around different tracks that are surrounded with damage-inducing edges, you get a recharge pad each lap to refill your ship's meter as long as you're over it, and each race is 5 laps in length, and as the remaining laps count down, the higher place you need to be in, which is indicated in the upper left corner. Failure to be at or ahead of that threshold will fail the race for you. Of course, taking too much damage will also fail the race as you explode into a fiery blaze. Also, as you complete laps, boosts will be awarded to use and will rocket your craft through the stages, though if I'm honest, I tend to ignore these as they just can be really difficult to manage and hit the turns with that increase in speed. Consistently avoiding walls and driving smart seems to be the better choice, but in general this game will take some time before you're consistently winning. While this doesn't feature series lead Captain Falcon, it does provide new content in a well-loved package that will immediately be familiar to fans of the series. If you saw my recent video about racing games, this one again is missing, but that one's actually my fault for just forgetting about this classic entry in the GBA, so don't make the same mistake, and if you're in the mood for some high-speed racing on the go, it's time to check out F-Zero Maximum Velocity. Alright, next up might even be a bit of a sleeper hit. This is Iridion II. This is a fantastic shooter that really feels at home on the system, yet also really impressive graphics which you can immediately see. Man, does this game look beautiful. Before I get ahead of myself though, this is a sequel to Iridion 3D, which is also impressive in its own right on the graphics side, but the gameplay is nowhere near as fun as this one is. The Iridion are a hostile race of enemies that are attacking human colonies in space, and the whole war apparently rests on your shoulders. Luckily, your ship packs a serious punch, and like most shooters, at your disposal is an auto-fire shot, a charge shot, and some smart bombs. And you have 6 different weapons to choose from, but each can be upgraded at least 3 times. The variability of the weapons is great, but it likely won't be long before you've found your favorite 2, and you just stick to those for the rest of the game. There's some decent story here if you're interested to read it between the levels, and it adds to the overall experience instead of just shooting, though again you can skip it too if you just prefer to get to the action. Stages are split into different galaxies that each contain 3 planets, which are the stages themselves. And you can choose the order of which you complete these planets, but you need to complete each set before you get access to the next 3. Each stage contains a boss and sometimes a mini-boss, and these are generally fun and add some cool gameplay elements that are engaging. The game isn't overly difficult, but it still feels satisfying to progress, and whether you're there for the story or the gorgeous graphics, either way you're going to have a good time. Speaking of, yes, this game clearly has me smitten, but they are really impressive. Paired with some of the art is the best music on the system, and it stands out in a genre that's usually associated with great soundtracks. Beyond that, this is just a great shooter, and even though it's on a handheld system, it can absolutely hold its own when it goes toe-to-toe with shooters on any platform. If you've not yet played Iridion II, definitely get it on your list. What kind of list would this be if I didn't include one of the 2 amazing Metroid games? While both are great, my favorite is Metroid Fusion. Zero Mission is technically a remake of the original Metroid game, but Metroid Fusion is its own story where Samus, now partially infused with cells of a Metroid, is investigating a space station that's being attacked by a parasite organism referred to as X. These X can replicate the hosts, and if you kill them without collecting the floating X that comes out of the enemies when they die, a power that Samus gained from the Metroid infusion, the X will regenerate itself and you'll be forced to fight them again. To escalate matters, one of the X has replicated Samus when she was at her full power and now chases her around the space station. Speaking of the station, the level design is great, and it's split up amongst explicit sections that each are connected via a central hub. This is a really neat idea, as it also gives a better sense of progression as you unlock more of these sections. And unlock you will, as the whole station is one big puzzle box waiting to be cracked open. To do that, you'll start accumulating more and more powers, like the ability to morph into a ball, drop bombs, and be able to shoot rockets, and so much more. If you're familiar with this series already, and let's be honest, you likely are, the usual upgrades are all here, and upgrading Samus once again feels really satisfying when combined with the overall level design. Boss fights are just as prevalent in the other titles of the series and genuinely feel fun by hitting the right balance with difficulty. In Fusion, bosses will give up their special X parasite that will give you upgrades in addition to some other sources. To mix up the pace a bit, you'll get some well-animated cutscenes on the elevator rides between sections that probably are just cleverly disguised loading times, but either way are a welcome catalyst for some of the storytelling. Overall, this is one seriously polished game, and you can just tell they put a lot of attention and detail on the flow and pacing. While Metroid Zero Mission tends to get some more praise, I really can't recommend Fusion enough, especially if you're a fan of the genre. Okay, next up is Mega Man Battle Network 3. Following in the footsteps of Pokemon with their multiple color releases, here too we see Capcom getting in on that action, producing Mega Man Battle Network 3 white and blue versions. Each has some differences that are relatively minor unless you need that absolute full experience, though if you've never played any of them, don't worry about it and just jump into either. The Battle Network series is a genre mashup of some of the Mega Man mechanics with some RPG components that culminate in something pretty unique. You control a young boy named Lon and his Net Navi, which is Mega Man. A Net Navi is basically like a program that runs on the internet and is used to battle or delete other Navi-like viruses. Lon can jack into computers and networks consoles scattered throughout the game, and at times you'll need to bounce between Lon and Mega Man as the outside can actually influence the internet. Dr. Wily is up to his old tricks and attempting to unleash the evil internet. Yes, I said evil internet, and here it's known as Alpha. Of course, like all great RPG storylines, this falls on the shoulders of one small child and his friends to prevent. The story is really good, if a bit slow in the beginning, but by the end of the nearly 25-hour RPG adventure, you'll be glued to your Game Boy Advance to see how this one turns out. Of course, as the name implies, you and your NetNavi Mega Man need to traverse the internet and do all the cleanup along the way. Battles are random encounters while on the internet, and puts you on a 6x3 tactical grid split between the good and bad guys, though you can have enemies that don't respect those boundaries and you'll gain abilities to push further into their part of the grid as well. You'll have an action timer at the top of your screen that allows you to pick chips, which to either use them for the round or you can toss back to your pile for new selections from your virtual stash. These chips will be different moves or abilities to recover your own health, and each are categorized by a letter which indicates which can be used together in the same round. A recovery chip and a shotgun attack chip can both be used in the same round if they share the same letter, for instance. Some chips will have an asterisk which can be used in conjunction with any other letter. In the beginning, this whole chip selection process can seem tedious or even a bit lackluster, but as you collect more and you begin to build your deck of 30 of them with, there's a lot of strategy that really starts to unfold, especially as you take on more and more difficult enemies. When to use chips versus toss can definitely be the deciding factor of winning some battles, and thus progressing really feels satisfying. Mega Man won't be the only robot you'll recognize from the main series either, as Roll, Gutsman, and others will be featured throughout. Of course, what kind of RPG or Mega Man game would be complete without boss fights? And here too you'll recognize some familiar faces, like this Flashman for instance. As you'd suspect, these fights are more involved and feature some new mechanics that tie in nicely to the boss. There's 4 Battle Network games on the GBA, with a continuation on new hardware, but out of the ones on this system, I prefer Mega Man Battle Network 3 the best. If you've somehow missed out on this series, definitely time to check them out. Next up on our list is Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. Well, Gruntilda is at it again, and this time she's attempting to prevent the events of the original game, which of course was on the Nintendo 64. Once again, it's up to our favorite bear and bird combo, Banjo and Kazooie, to thwart her attempt. Despite the smaller form factor of an already impressive 3D platformer, this very much feels like an uncompromised sequel, and it's incredible how much is packed into this game. If you've never played a Banjo-Kazooie game before, it's really boiled down to a solid platformer where collecting is at the center of everything you do. Like the main series, the game is split into different worlds which are all linked by a central hub, and you can trigger the unlocking of those worlds by turning in the main collectible called Jiggies, these golden jigsaw puzzle pieces. Within the levels, you'll collect Jingos, the little guys that are hiding in the levels, and collecting each of them will earn you a shining Jiggy. Lastly, you're collecting music notes, of which there's 100 for each level. These notes will let you learn more moves like swimming, jumping higher, and more. I mentioned the game was packing some punch, but you can clearly see it in the levels, puzzles, and collectibles, as they're all backed by the upgradable moves you know and love from the original 64 game. Also present is the Mumbo Jumbo huts that, once you collect a totem in the level, you'll be able to transform you into different things that will allow you to solve some more puzzles, and that's always a great thing. If you didn't get enough content, there's also some more mini-games that come in a few forms, like a slide race, where you're steering around obstacles or you're attempting to grab things with a timer. They're not bad, but they're not a ton of fun either, and the graphics are actually poor for these sections in particular. Thankfully, by contrast, the rest of the stages, the environments are all bright and well designed. Combined with the art and familiar gameplay, this really makes for one of the best platforms on the system, no question. One of the best things about the Game Boy Advance is the copious amounts of quality RPGs on the system, and while I could easily fill the entire list with just JRPGs, I wanted to highlight one in particular that I return to every so often. This is Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. This is one of 2 Fire Emblem games on the system, the first of which was the actual first game in the series to be localized for the US, so this sequel just builds upon an already solid foundation. This is of course a tactical RPG, and so you could easily consolidate gameplay to reading a lot of story and completing battle challenges, but that would really be underselling this. To be fair though, there is a lot of story, and that's a good thing because the game really nails it. The premise of which is that the Sacred Stones are spread across different kingdoms which are now at peace, or at least were until one betrays that peacetime and takes others by surprise, and it just plunges the entire world into unbalanced chaos. It's very compelling and definitely a highlight amongst RPG stories on the GBA. The game is split over 21 chapters, which interweaves the story so well where it never feels formulaic. Within these chapters, your list of companions grows dramatically, and depending on your actions can unlock more. Beyond that, you get some branching options between the 2 main characters in which you want to follow before they eventually all come together for an amazing finale. The battle maps are really well designed, and they'll provide many interesting aspects like towns to visit, which can result in some good benefits, positioning challenges, and so much more. Speaking of positioning, it's of course still a key to combat, but there's also weapon triangles where the weapon type you use will have an advantage or disadvantage when paired against each other. A sword holds an advantage over an axe, but is disadvantaged against a polearm, for instance. This will be a larger deciding factor on how you position your troops and plays a significant role in combat as a whole. The graphics for the game are great, and I really enjoy the battle fight cutaways as it's a staple for the series, like in Shining Force as well. The music complements really well, and it just gets you in the mood for the game. In fact, there's nothing I really dislike about this game. It's just really well made from end to end. You could swap this out for maybe the Shining Force games or the Golden Sun games, which are all great in their own right, but Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones is the one I continually come back to. Next up is the Pinball of the Dead. If you watched my video on Dreamcast accessories, you know that I have a thing for the House of the Dead franchise, and this game is no different. There's actually a few good pinball games on the system, notably Mario Pinball Land, but again, this theme will take the cake for me. You choose between 3 machines, each very unique in their design, but all of them are fun. They'll all come with some common themes like multiple levels with many flippers, a shooting minigame for skill shots, and perhaps best of all, boss fights. I'm a big fan of actual physical pinball, so I usually spend the first leg of my gameplay with any video pinball game testing out the physics and seeing how it shoots, as these can largely vary between different implementations. Pinball of the Dead does a really good job in replicating physics in a decent enough way to have consistency in how the ball bounces and how it launches off the flippers, which is important to avoid frustrations in games of this type. It seems like a no-brainer, but it's missing from a lot of other games of this genre. On all of the machines, you'll have zombies and other monsters across the playfields, which will divert the ball, depending on its velocity, and these largely act as moving targets. Most have at least one ramp, which is great, though if there was a low point for the physics, it's likely with these. When you start each machine, there's a little instruction blurb which helps, but I actually wish there was more, even if I had to pause the action to access it. There's a lot of features that each of these bring, and without further information, you're kind of blindly slamming around until you can put two and two together. I mentioned the boss fights, and it's definitely a highlight for sure. When it's lit, hitting the boss scoop will trigger these FMV video introductions to the bosses, and you're going to recognize them, of course, from House of the Dead 2, and they're well represented within the pinball form. These are fun, but definitely a bit of a challenge due to a large amount of hit points needed to take them down. I know that video pinball might not be everyone's cup of tea, but this is a really solid title, and it really incorporates the theme well. Definitely one to put on your list if you're a fan of the House of the Dead series. Okay, and there's a deep dive of the Game Boy Advance, its hardware revisions, and some of its amazing game library. I know I missed a lot of the incredible games. It's impossible to cover them all, of course, right? But these really are some of my favorites, even though cutting some others was definitely hard to do. I'm sure you all have your own favorites, so let me know, of course, in the comments down below, and we'll have to do a follow-up video in the future. Until next time, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.